3 African nations just built their bank. Without the IMF, without France, and without asking anyone. No loans, no permission, no headlines. Just silence, a new financial weapon, and an unbelievable amount of money on the table. But what exactly did they build, and why is the West so afraid to talk about it? Let's find out. In a quiet announcement that slipped past most global headlines, something historic just unfolded in West Africa. On paper, it looked like a simple regional initiative. 3 landlocked countries coming together to launch a new financial institution. But dig just a little deeper, and you realize this wasn't business as usual. This was a breakaway, the kind that rattles old systems to their core. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, nations often reduced to statistics about poverty, coups, and insurgency, have just done something bold. They launched a regional bank of their own. It's called the Confederal Bank for Investment and Development. But don't let the bureaucratic name fool you. This isn't some harmless administrative body. This is a revolt written in currency. A bank with one mission: to fund the future without Western money, oversight, or interference. It opened with 500 billion CFA francs in starting capital, roughly 820 to 833 million. A serious chunk of cash by any standard, but especially for countries that, up until recently, were told they couldn't fund anything without foreign help. Now that money isn't coming from Paris, Washington, or Brussels. It's coming from within their economies, within their reserves, within their regional networks. It's African money, meant for African development. What makes this bank so disruptive isn't just that it exists, it's where it exists and why. These are not the economic powerhouses of Africa. These are Sahel countries, nations locked in geopolitical turbulence, abandoned by global partners, and punished by sanctions. And yet, despite the chaos, they've managed to do something the experts said was impossible. They're taking control of their economic destiny, not by protesting in international forums, but by quietly building the tools of sovereignty. There was no flashy ribbon-cutting ceremony, no gala with foreign dignitaries. The launch wasn't staged to impress investors. It wasn't about optics, it was about intent. The kind of intent that tells you something bigger is underway. These countries aren't waiting for help anymore. They're declaring they don't need it. And they're doing it through action, not speeches. The Confederal Bank will operate across 3 countries that, until recently, were part of the Francophone West African economic system, tethered to the French-backed CFA currency and deeply entangled in institutions like ECOWAS and the West African Economic and Monetary Union. But since 2023, these same countries have pulled out of ECOWAS, kicked out French troops, and started realigning their alliances. So when they say they've built a bank, it's not just a bank, it's a final step in their exit strategy, a move that signals they're not coming back. And here's where the story gets even more unsettling. Not for them, but for everyone watching. This wasn't just a response to isolation. It was a calculated escalation. After being sanctioned, politically frozen out, and economically squeezed, these nations did something that's rarely done in international politics. They stopped reacting and started building. They didn't retaliate with threats or diplomatic outrage. They responded by creating something tangible, something that makes them less vulnerable, more independent, and harder to control. To understand the magnitude of what's happening, you have to look at what this bank replaces. For decades, development in the region has been filtered through institutions like the World Bank and the African Development Bank and donor-backed projects managed by NGOs and foreign contractors. The fine print of these partnerships often meant surrendering control, reshaping policy, and accepting oversight from those holding the purse strings. The Confederal Bank flips that script. It puts the money and the decision-making back into local hands. And this isn't a symbolic gesture. It's built to fund real projects, infrastructure, agriculture, industrial development, sectors the IMF is always too slow to support and too quick to politicize. With this bank, there's no need to prove your creditworthiness to a Western economist who's never set foot in a Sahel village. No need to meet growth targets shaped in foreign boardrooms. The only requirement is that the project serves the region, not foreign investors. The West's silence on this move speaks volumes. There's no outrage, no media blitz, No expert panels asking how this will affect the region's stability. It's almost as if pretending it didn't happen is the only strategy left. Because acknowledging this bank means acknowledging something far more dangerous than a financial transaction. It means acknowledging that Africa is capable of creating its own systems. That 3 coup countries can actually organize, cooperate, and lead. And so the Confederal Bank enters the scene not with fanfare, but with quiet defiance. It's not flashy, it's not headline hungry, but it's built to last, and more importantly, built to grow. Now the question is, why did they take this step? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. To understand why Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger built this bank, you have to look beyond numbers. This wasn't born from ambition, it was born from exhaustion. After decades of waiting, of complying, of adjusting to the expectations of development partners, something finally snapped. Not in protest, not in rage, but in clarity. These nations didn't just wake up one morning and decide to build a bank. They reached a conclusion many others haven't dared to voice. The game is rigged, and always has been. For years, the people of the Sahel were told that salvation would come from outside. Every new government was expected to prove its loyalty to international lenders, chase reform packages, and shake hands with smiling diplomats who controlled the flow of aid. It became a pattern, a humiliating, exhausting ritual. Leaders came and went, but the rules stayed the same. Obey, borrow, and pretend it's help. And what did they get in return? Airports that never opened, roads that led nowhere, projects that started with ribbon cuttings and ended in silence. The illusion of progress was good enough for the headlines, but never enough for the people. The truth, which Western governments and global banks rarely admit, is that much of this aid was designed to sustain dependency, not eliminate it. In exchange for loans, they gave up their policy space. In exchange for support, they handed over contracts to foreign corporations. In the name of partnerships, they watched their sovereignty shrink. Every time they asked for investment in agriculture, they were told to wait. Every time they proposed local industry, they were told it was too risky. But every time a multinational company wanted access to their gold, their cotton, or their uranium, suddenly, the money flowed. That's not mismanagement. That's a system working exactly as it was designed. And these countries, they've had enough. This is why the decision to build their bank wasn't just strategic, it was emotional. It was about reclaiming the dignity that years of financial dependency had eroded. It was about sending a message. We're not asking anymore. They're not rejecting development. They're rejecting the model of development that made them dependent in the first place. But there's another layer to this rebellion, one that goes deeper than economics. When these 3 countries formed the Alliance of Sahel States AES in 2023, the world dismissed it as a defensive pact, something to keep themselves afloat after being suspended from ECOWAS. But the AES wasn't born from desperation. It was born from alignment, a political, cultural, and ideological alignment that says, Africa can no longer afford to be polite about its suffering. That's what unites Traoré, Goïta, and Chiani. They don't just govern countries, they command narratives. Narratives that refuse to be filtered through Western think tanks or donor-funded media outlets. They've made it clear. Their revolutions aren't just military, they're psychological. They're about making their people believe that waiting is over, that the era of always looking outward is finished. This bank, then, isn't a financial institution in the Western sense. It's more like a counter-narrative machine. It rewires what it means to be developed. Instead of proving its worth to foreign investors, these leaders are choosing to prove it to their people. Instead of tweaking GDP for a credit rating upgrade, they're building systems that make daily life function without begging. But make no mistake, this wasn't just about internal frustration. There was a trigger. When France pulled out its troops, when sanctions were slapped on them, when aid was frozen as punishment for rejecting democratic norms, that's when the mask fell. That's when these nations realized that friendship with the West was conditional, that the moment they stopped obeying, the help stopped coming. And at that moment, a question emerged that changed everything. If they can cut us off this easily, were we ever truly sovereign? That's when the idea of the bank took root, not as a side project, but as a line in the sand. And unlike so many post-colonial promises that faded with time, this one stuck. Because it wasn't built on ideology, it was built on memory. The memory of how their economies were looted, their currencies controlled, and their futures mortgaged out through smiling diplomats and technical experts. They're not paranoid, they're remembering. So yes, they built a bank, but really, they built a wall between their future and the people who used to control it. And now, from the outside, that wall looks like a threat, because it is. Not to peace, not to develop, but to the entire system that made sure these nations never had the tools to dream without permission. They built that bank because they're done dreaming under someone else's ceiling. But what will this bank actually do? So they built it. Not just as a rejection of the past, but as a blueprint for the future. But this isn't a vanity project. This isn't a monument to revolution. The Confederal Bank for Investment and Development is designed to move money, materials, machines, and minds. It's not here to impress anyone. It's here to fix the things no one else would. For years, the West talked about infrastructure investment, yet the roads between these three countries remain dust paths and potholes. The World Bank would announce multi-million-dollar railway programs, but the only thing that moved was the consultants and their reports. Now, the Confederal Bank is stepping in where promises failed. Its first order of business? Rewiring the region's bones. We're talking rail lines that connect Niger's uranium hubs to Mali's factories, and onward to Burkina Faso's distribution centers. Not to Europe, not to ports for export, but to each other. Because that's the difference. This isn't about exporting raw materials for foreign profit. It's about building internal networks that serve local industry and labor. For decades, the only routes that worked were those that led resources out of Africa. The Confederal Bank's mission is to flip the flow, to link farmers to processors, miners to refiners, and products to markets within the region. It's the logistics of liberation. But this transformation won't ride on steel alone. The next battleground is energy. In a region battered by blackouts and controlled by imported fuel prices, the Confederal Bank is backing a different future: decentralized, renewable, and locally maintained energy grids. The plan? Massive investment in solar farms, especially in zones where sunshine is abundant and energy poverty is deepest. These aren't foreign-built mega-projects that require IMF supervision. These are community-powered microgrids, financed by people who live in the region. Because when the lights stay on, schools stay open. Clinics run refrigerators. Local businesses stop depending on diesel. And just like that, development becomes real. But energy is only one link in the chain. Food is the other. The Confederal Bank is preparing a major push into agriculture and food processing. Not through foreign agribusinesses, but through local cooperatives, village-owned enterprises, and national distribution hubs. The goal is radical in its simplicity: grow what they eat and eat what they grow. For too long, these countries have relied on imported rice, wheat, and processed goods, even when their soil could grow more than enough. Why? Because the aid system discouraged investment in food self-sufficiency. It was always cheaper to import, not because the land was unproductive, but because foreign food came with subsidies while local farmers were left with machetes and droughts. The Confederal Bank is flipping that formula. It's giving farmers access to equipment, irrigation, storage, and processing, the entire chain, so they no longer sell tomatoes for pennies and buy tomato paste in cans from Europe. This isn't charity. This is agricultural sovereignty, and it's being built one crop, one tool, and one village at a time. And then there's the skies. Yes, even the air has been colonized. For decades, regional travel in West Africa has been dominated by foreign airlines. It's a cruel joke. To fly from one African country to another, you often have to pass through Europe. That changes now. The Confederal Bank is laying the groundwork for a regional airline, one that connects Bamako to Niamey to Ouagadougou directly, without layovers, without visa barriers, and without price gouging from legacy carriers. The plan is to create an air corridor that facilitates trade, education, and tourism within the region, something no foreign investor ever found profitable, but which is essential to regional integration. But it goes deeper, because integration isn't just about movement, it's about trust. And money has never trusted African borders. That's why the bank is developing its interoperable payment systems, digital platforms that allow businesses and individuals to send money, receive payments, and conduct cross-border transactions without using euros or dollars. No more relying on the CFA system backed by France. No more high fees for simply wiring funds from Mali to Niger. The Confederal Bank is clearing the path for real trade, unchained from colonial currency regimes. And let's be clear, this bank isn't run by idealists, it's run by strategists. Every loan, every project, and every investment will be done with risk management, long-term return, and national priorities in mind. They've watched the debt traps, they've read the small print, and they've learned that free money usually comes with invisible handcuffs. That's why they're setting the terms this time. No, they don't have billions. Not yet. But what they do have is intent. Sharp, coordinated, and self-funded. Every dollar invested is aimed at solving the kind of problems no foreign partner ever prioritized. Because when your hands are on the wheel, you drive toward different destinations. This is not about catching up to the West. It's about building what the West never intended to give them. You could look at the Confederal Bank and see numbers, capital reserves, project budgets, financial statements. But that's only if you're thinking like an economist. Look again, and you'll realize it's not built like a bank at all. It's built like a fortress, a network, a spine. Because behind the paperwork and loan programs lies a much bolder ambition: unification. Not just for money, but for purpose, of politics, of policy, of people. This isn't just about development. It's about locking three nations into a shared destiny that no outsider can divide again. For decades, the story of Africa has been disunity. Manufactured disunity. The borders, the languages, the currencies, and even the time zones were drawn and decided to ensure one thing: fragmentation. Countries that share rivers don't share railroads. Nations that speak the same tongue trade in foreign ones. Neighbors who should build together often find themselves bound to different donors, obeying different creditors, and answering to different priorities. That wasn't a mistake. That was a design. One that kept West African nations dependent, not only on foreign capital, but also on each other's weakness. The Confederal Bank is blowing a hole through that wall. By tying their economies together through real investment, not treaties, not talk shops, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are welding their futures to one another. Not through a handshake, but through concrete fiber optic cables, joint ventures, and sovereign digital systems. This bank doesn't just lend to countries, it lends to a bloc. And that matters. Because once you align your development plans, your energy grids, your transport systems, and your food networks, you are no longer three vulnerable states. You are one coordinated entity. That's the core logic of the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, and the Confederal Bank is its financial engine. It is what turns statements into infrastructure, what turns vision into roads, what turns unity from an idea into something that lives on spreadsheets, on shipping manifests, and in the daily trade between communities that used to be strangers. In fact, if you really want to understand the weight of this moment, forget the bank for a second. Look at what it's replacing. In the past, regional integration meant ECOWAS. On paper, it looked like a strong West African bloc. In practice, it was paralyzed, dominated by larger economies like Nigeria, aligned with Western policies, and built around a colonial currency still pegged to the euro. For years, smaller countries had to beg ECOWAS for flexibility, and were given bureaucracy in return. But when the military governments of the Sahel started making decisions the West didn't like, removing foreign troops, rejecting unfair contracts, calling out hypocrisy, ECOWAS didn't act like a brotherhood. It acted like a policeman. Suspensions, sanctions, closed borders, isolation. So when the Sahel broke off and created the AES, they weren't walking away from unity. They were redefining it. They weren't rejecting integration. They were building it on new terms. And now, with the Confederal Bank at its core, the AES isn't just a political alliance. It's a working machine. One with a budget, a currency strategy, and shared economic laws already in the pipeline. They're drafting customs agreements. They're developing joint procurement programs. They're proposing a common market for key goods and services. All backed, coordinated, and executed through the bank. And here's where it gets even more powerful. Because unity isn't just a strategy. It's also a shield. Individually, these countries were vulnerable to coup, to sanctions, to economic sabotage. But united, they are much harder to pressure, much harder to isolate. No more single points of failure. No more exploiting one nation's weakness to destabilize the others. When Burkina Faso was cut off from aid, Mali stepped in. When Niger faced sanctions, its AES partners offered alternative trade routes. And now, with a regional bank, they don't have to explain themselves to hostile lenders. They don't have to restructure their economies every time a Western agency shifts its criteria for governance. They've created a closed loop, not one of secrecy, but of self-determination. And the bank is the entry point. If you want access to opportunities, to funding, to markets inside this bloc, you follow the rules set by the AES. Not Washington, not Paris, not Brussels. It's a reversal of roles. For the first time, African nations are laying down the framework, and others must decide whether to join on their terms. That's not just a policy change. That's a change in posture. This is what makes the Confederal Bank more than a financial institution. It's a political instrument, a new kind of tool in Africa's hands, not for reaction, but for assertion, for designing reality, not just responding to it. And it's already sparking questions far beyond the Sahel. What happens when Guinea asks to join the AES? When Chad seeks funding from the Confederal Bank? When the AU watches a small alliance do what it couldn't in decades? This isn't a local experiment anymore. It's a continental prototype. And it's working. Do you think that now anyone can stop African nations from getting true independence? Let us know in the comments section. Do you still believe in the myth that Africa needs help? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.